Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by and for returning to the old world. Today a little bit of a discussion around a popular discussion point at the moment regarding whether Games Workshop's popularity is bad for wargaming and creativity. Quite a few YouTube content creators have had their say on this, a variety of different size of content creators as well. So I thought I'd just chuck in a few thoughts of my own. In the matter of fairness, I will look at some arguments for and against the idea that Games Workshop is bad for creativity / wargaming, and then come up with some conclusions. So do stick around to the end to hear what those conclusions are, or just skip forward if that's what floats your boat. Either way, here we go. The reasons why Games Workshop isn't bad for wargaming, creativity, etc. First of these reasons really is community. The popularity of Games Workshop games, be it 40k, Warhammer Fantasy / Age of Sigmar, or whatever, it means that there is going to be a local community for a new player certainly to get involved in. That means it's easy to get a game. You'll probably be able to face a range of different factions and lots of different styles of playing the game. Locally, you'll probably have people that are very competitive, people who are not at all competitive, and then the full spectrum of people in between. Whilst wargaming is a niche hobby, and that's something I'll probably talk about a few times in the course of this video, there's enough of that niche around that there are people you can turn to for your games. And it's not just about the gaming side as well. Having a reasonably sized local community means, especially again if you're a newer player, it's more likely you'll find someone you can reach out to get advice on putting an army together, painting a particular model, whatever it may be, building terrain, etc. And that ignores the fact that obviously that Games Workshop has its own dedicated stores staffed by people who should be eminently familiar with the range of models available for the Games Workshop games, their paint ranges, and know how to get the best out of those particular products. What else is there to think about? Well, Games Workshop games can be a gateway. A lot of people I know got into Games Workshop through things, and the wargaming hobby I should say, through games like Hero Quest back in the day, Battle Masters, and then moving into wargaming on the tabletop. Now, Games Workshop games themselves, I don't think they're hugely original. This isn't to say that they're not trend leaders. They are by pure size. They will be able to lead on a trend, but the games developers, the play testers, aren't going to be living under a rock. They will see what's going on in the wider universe of the wargaming hobby and pick up aspects of them when they're crafting games for Games Workshop. This means that as a player you could be introduced to a concept that you perhaps really like but think, do you know what, if it was done slightly differently, this would be really, really good. And out there probably is a game that does that thing that you like in the way that you want it to be done, rather than the way Games Workshop have chosen to adopt a particular approach. So it can help broaden your horizons because you've got this base laying position of a popular game that loads of people are playing. And then we come into the idea of the well-supported lore. And this definitely, I think, connects to the creativity side of Games Workshop. The main games have very well supported lore. You look at Warhammer 40,000, there are countless books that have been written of varying quality, admittedly, talking about the background story from the Horus Heresy through to the current situation. But within that hugely developed backstory, there's so many grey areas, bits not marked as redacted by the Inquisition, for example. The two missing legions from before the heresy in the Great Crusades. And that gives you so much scope to play your own game and carve out your own story within the wider narrative. And I think this is really something that's actively encouraged at the moment by Games Workshop, and particularly if you, again, talking about Warhammer 40,000, things like the Crusade system, all about driving your own story with your own characters. So that, if anything, just enables creativity within the hobby, rather than feeling limited to perhaps recreating something from a historical standpoint that's actually happened. So is it all good? Well, no. I did mention, in the interest of balance, I'll talk about some of the other arguments. So here we go. Games Workshop games are really popular, so they can squeeze out their opposition. Now, I'm not saying that this is done intentionally at all, but when you've got such a large market share of the interest in products, another game could come along that's absolutely amazing, but if it can't get enough traction within the community, it can't get the exposure, then it may well wither and die, despite what might be, for some people, an absolutely perfect game. If people only want to absorb Games Workshop content, this means people talking about the wider hobby are going to shift their thoughts towards Games Workshop and may miss out on opportunities to talk about other things because either they don't know about it themselves or because they don't think it's going to give them a product for what they're trying to sell. And this kind of brings us into the problem of Games Workshop games hogging the attention. You might have a really good local community, lots of active players playing Games Workshop games, but then find other systems, other games, just aren't represented. And you might really, really want to play a very British Civil War, or you might want to do something around the Spanish Armada, or any of the sort of the Mad Maxy sort of sci-fi games. But if Games Workshop has all of the attention and people aren't willing to release from that, then as a wargamer, it kind of restricts your choices, because if you've got no one to play against, you can't really play a lot of these games unless you go down the solo wargamer route and perhaps develop a lot of your own house rules in order to try and make it work. One of the things I've touched on as well has been the shifting of focus of creativity, and this is perhaps something that's quite pertinent to the YouTube content creators that have talked around this topic. If you're trying to make a living out of talking about wargaming, then you're going to be constantly hunting the views, the ad revenue, etc. And when you've got a small range of products within a very niche environment, which is wargaming, that are so popular compared to everything else, then that's what you're going to talk about, even if it's not what you want to talk about. And I think this has been the major point that's been raised by a few YouTubers. They'd love to talk about other games, but feel if they do so, it's a bit of a waste because they don't get the ad revenue, etc., to make it worth their while. I'm not sure, to be honest, whether this is necessarily a Games Workshop problem or whether it's a bit of a community problem with people not wanting to necessarily be exposed to other things. Because if you want to watch a video about Warhammer Fantasy Battle, why not also think about other games that are very similar? Kings of War, for example. Though I admit, in saying that, I've just pulled out probably one of the bigger alternatives to the Warhammer style of game. I do know there was a fan version of Hail Caesar that was being kicked around for a while. I'm not sure how far that went, but it just goes to show that the things are out there, I suppose. If the audience is available and wants to listen to this sort of stuff. So where does this actually leave us? And I think as I've been pondering and waffling my way through the various points I wanted to make, I think reaching the conclusion around whether Games Workshop's bad for wargaming, bad for creativity, bad for content creators, the answer really depends on the lens that you put on this. As someone new into wargaming that wants to play some games, wants to be able to get help with painting techniques, stuff like that, having a game system that's really popular, that I enjoy playing, which is obviously important, that's a huge benefit. And if I can use that to perhaps spin off to try other games with maybe a slightly smaller subsect of the local community, great. It gets me playing games. And if there's only a limited spending capacity, as all of us have to varying degrees, limited time, limited money to throw at the hobby, then knowing I'm picking something up that I will be able to use is really valuable, rather than taking a gamble on a gaming system that perhaps falls over locally within a couple of months because not enough people play it, or the couple of people that play it decide to move on to something else, things like that. If, however, you are looking at this through a lens of content creation, if you are producing a creative product that you're trying to sell to an audience, yeah, absolutely, having a very dominant set of games to talk about is going to limit your creativity. Sure, there's ways and means around it, and I've seen some really creative ways about talking about things that aren't Games Workshop through the lens of talking about Games Workshop. But if you really want to talk about Cruel Seas, for example, Black Powder, all relatively large games, but not going to really get the traction that you want, then yeah, I can see how that would be frustrating. And ultimately, if you're trying to make a living out of it, then you are going to be tied into talking about things that people want to talk about, things they want to hear about, and producing stuff that sells and being trapped in that circle. So with that, I kind of guess that from my perspective, having a massive market share sitting with Games Workshop for me personally isn't hugely problematic. I'm a wargamer first, and I make the odd video waffling on about stuff. Second, very much a distant second. But if I were to put myself in the shoes of someone looking to make a living out of this, then absolutely I can see why actually I would want that freedom to talk about more products and for it to be worth my time doing so, because I know that if I start talking about Oathmark, I will get enough views, enough ad revenue in order to put the food on the table. Whereas in the current environment, the more niche games, they probably don't allow you to do that. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on the topic. Thank you very much for stopping by and for listening to me ramble for 16 minutes or so. This is Return to the Old World. Have a great day.